whoever builds the most like powerful, uh, interesting AI coding agent, then that will kind of like steer how the next generation of models will evolve too, because that's where a lot of the training data will get generated.
Yeah. And models for the most part were trained, and what we're seeing is they're very high affinity for the tools that we think that they're trained with, like things like edit file
Yeah.
and those kinds of things. Even we're seeing like Gemini seem to be more reluctant to run shell commands.
Yeah.
And I mean, that gets to what we were talking about at the beginning. If you have MCP jam in like 100 other tools, it hasn't seen any of those, and it's not nearly as good at invoking them. But that's where the next generation of models, they're probably going to kind of expand to more common kinds of tools to call.
Right? It's kind of an arms race, right? It's this, the models are not, coming back to what we said earlier, like if you have a model selector and just arbitrary tools, you won't get the same result as when you have tools that are optimized for one model with which it was trained. But then the big labs are incentivized to make their models work with a lot of different tool implementations and have them be as generic as possible.
Welcome everyone to another installment of Raising an Agent. I'm here with Thorsten and Quinn.
Hello, nice to be here.
And my name is Beyang, and we're just going to have a casual conversation about the latest on AMP and coding agents. And I think this time is a little bit different because we're all here in the SF office.
Yes.
So it's cool to be in person.
It's no Zoom, it's no 6 a.m. for you, it's no 6 a.m. for me. It's in the afternoon, it's nice.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, let's dive in. I guess it's been 5 weeks, 5 long weeks since the last installment of this. So feels like that's like an eon in terms of AI land. So what has changed in the last 5 weeks in the realm of like coding agents?
You want to go or should I go? I'll go. I'll say, I think, even though it sounds smug, I think a lot of the stuff we've been saying in the first 4 episodes have turned out to be true. Like, when you look around the landscape, there's more agents, there's more coding agents that are based on the same idea that, unconstrained tokens, you have like a tool selection. I think if they would all open up the hood, you would also see that most of them also ripped out a lot of the stuff they built before and now replaced it with Claude 3.7 and tool calls. And I think a lot of them are, waking up to this. So yeah, like I don't want to say everything we said is going to come true, but I think we were right with this like a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, you published the How to Build an Agent. You walk people through how to do that.
Yeah.
Subtitle, The Emperor Has No Clothes. And yet, still, we literally publish all of our secrets. We tell people how to build the damn thing. And then it doesn't quite click for a lot of people. They say there's no moat. Okay, but what is your moat?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know. So the blog post for everybody who hasn't read it is, it explains like how to build your own coding agent in 300 lines of code. And I wrote this first internally because people would use AMP and they would say like, how do you do this when, say, it runs into a terminal error? Or how do you do this when it fails to edit a file or something? Or how do you do this or this? And the response has always been, we don't do anything really. We just send the error message up to the model, and then the model goes and decides to do something else. Like, example, the model decides to run a terminal command not found. There's no logic. It's just command not found, send it back up, and then the model says, let me try something else. And the blog post explains it, like there's nothing. It's just basically all text you send up to the model comes back down with text. And yet still, like, I wrote in a blog post that, everything in AMP, like, don't mistake this. Like, there's a lot of elbow grease in AMP to make it work well and to, to tune the tools to be more reliable and to make the UI look good. But ultimately, a lot of it comes down to the model. And still, people read the blog post and they go, but how do you do this? Like, there has to be something there. Like, there has to be something of how you do this. And
yeah, or they think that there's something in our system prompt that's genius. Like, there's that repo that said, here's $1 trillion of value. I've taken the system prompts from these tools.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is we've gotten a lot more people on is people will try one thing in AMP and then the same thing in like Cursor or Windsurf or Claude Code. And really it's like rolling the dice. And if AMP gets it right because of, total luck, they're like, wow, AMP is really good. And if we don't, they're like, oh, this thing, sucks. And it's kind of crazy. It's like, if you win at blackjack, you're not like smart,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But it's just like, okay, how well the cards influenced how the model worked, or your cards work better at blackjack or something. But that's not the case. I think
And people want to think that it's the case because that is their mental model for how applications are built.
Like there must be some one weird trick that you're doing that makes the agent work.
I think the system prompt does play a role, but if I don't know, I think the model is the biggest thing that's still determining stuff. The prompt you throw in also has a lot of like value, like a lot of influence, and the system prompt has like, I don't know how to describe it yet, but it influences like maybe how aggressive or tame the model will be, and what tools it uses for which occasion, stuff like this. But a lot of the things that people point out, where here's where AMP worked, here's where it didn't work, or here's where Cursor worked, or Windsurf, or whatsoever. I don't like. It's hard to pinpoint it. It's hard to say, it did this or it did this when, or this was the system prompt, or it was this, when in fact it was, maybe the difference between you using a library that's, I don't know, has a new version out and the LLM is outdated. So in this case, there's nothing any system prompt could do. And yeah,
it's not one weird trick. It's a bunch of tricks and other things that we've implemented along the way in response to like failure modes, right?
Yes, I would say it's the most important thing is, and I, not die on this hill, but it's a hill I'm willing to stand on right now, is that I think a good curated set of tools that's tuned and that has good prompts, I think that goes a long way, which is also why I don't really believe in the, here, like, pick out of these 100 tools, pick the ones you like the best. I think that's won't lead to the best result. If you just want to have a conversation with the model and you only have search available, then sure, only enable search. But if you wanted to actually do stuff in your code base, I think you want tools with prompts that are tuned to each other.
Yeah. What doesn't work is here's a bunch of here's 100 different tools where the prompts aren't tuned and just expected to work. That's
Yeah, most of what you see from people saying, oh, I hooked up these 7 MCP servers and it's amazing, is a very nicely cherry-picked demo path.
Yeah.
And in reality, if you go set up the MCP server for GitHub that everyone uses, it's got these like write file commands, and the agent will get that mixed up with writing local files, and it'll go like right to the main branch on your repo, and you never see those in demos.
Yes.
So, I think when people don't understand that most of this comes from the model, and they see these amazing demos, I can understand why they have a totally wrong mental model. But actually, the beauty of understanding the mental model well is it's so simple. And so if the thing doesn't work, go and tweak your agent.md file that has the guidelines, or go and change the prompt.
Yeah.
It's not like other tools, they can do this amazing job of taking a really shitty prompt that lacks information and putting it in. Nothing can fill that gap, only you can. But that's really, what's missing.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also something that people often forget about, is that every tool you add with, like, if you add, like, I think GitHub, the MCP server has like 40 tools. Or so. Like, it has a lot of tools, right? And all of that gets added to your system prompt. And that also makes it slower. And it also, it's more stuff that the model has to think about. So, you give it 180 tools because you added 4 MCP servers, and then you ask it to do something ambiguous. It's going to try stuff, but it's won't lead to the best experience.
Makes sense. So in terms of like how you would describe what does differentiate AMP from other coding agents, like we just said that there's no one weird trick, there's no like succinct way of describing it at the implementation level. I think one of the things that has emerged as we've been talking about this ourselves is just like what sort of like persona or what sort of like feedback we're optimizing for. So yeah, like how would you describe what the kind of like target audience for AMP is?
It's the person who wants it to work well. When you can get out of the mindset of people who either don't put in the effort to make this new tool work for them, or who try to catch it, like, haha, I got it,
Yeah.
when they have like a really bad prompt. Like those people, we want to help them eventually, but we want to work with and build it for the people that want to put in a little bit of work, that know how amazing this can be if it does work well. And so there's so many pieces of feedback we've gotten from people that are really well intended, where if we had done that, that would have taken us down a route that would have overfit to today's model capabilities, that would have optimized for that user who doesn't want to do any work. And, it's like an LLM, it can be really smart, but if you're holding fingers behind your back, it can't count how many fingers there are because it does not know that information fundamentally.
Yeah.
So we also think that the whole idea of agents is it can like magnify the impact a single person can have. So if you've got a company with 100 engineers and 5 of them are really good at using agents, like they will spread that gospel to the rest of the devs. You don't need to win over all 100. You don't need to win over the detractors. You can kind of let that soak into them eventually.
Yeah. I'll add that for me, it's what I don't want to build, or what I'm not interested in, is this tool with, one line prompt, and it's like, build me a wedding website, and then it just goes and does stuff, and that's not what I want to build. What I want to build is this, power drill, like a power tool that I can use to get more stuff done in code, and that helps me the grunt work and the busy work and all of that stuff that you really only start to notice once you see the agent do it.
Yeah.
Like a friend and I, we were talking this morning, and he said, he's been recently getting into AI, and he made the honest effort, and he's like, I try to use it by just not writing any code and by really telling it what I wanted to do. And he said what I told him earlier, that you need to accept that it doesn't know certain things. It's not a wishing well, so you have to be explicit, and then you instruct it. You send it off, and it does stuff for you. And what he said was that he realized how much busy work he has to do with normal programming, like just fixing the parentheses here, fixing the braces here, moving the import up there, renaming this file, blah, 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 blah. And I want to have these agents that go off and do this stuff for me. I don't want like the build me the wedding website. I want move this over here and refactor this so it calls this, and then go and do it. That's what I want, like a power tool.
It's like there's a difference between like good reading your mind and bad reading your mind. Like good reading your mind is like, oh, you've been watching me as I've been doing stuff, and so you kind of anticipate what I want to do next because there's enough actual signal there.
Yeah.
Bad reading your mind is like, oh, I just typed in like a 5-word prompt and I expect a whole application. Like almost at like an information theoretic level, there's not enough bits of information encapsulated in that prompt. So like if you're using a tool that actually goes and builds the full app for you, it's kind of just relying on its own priors or what's baked into its like training data to do that.
Yeah. And then people say, oh, well, if it doesn't have the information it needs, it should ask me. And then, of course, if we went and built it, we told the agent in the system prompt, maybe be more tentative, ask the user if you're not sure. We've actually like experimented with some of this. And the problem is, then people say, I don't want it asking me all these things.
Yeah. Why didn't it do this? It should do this. It shouldn't ask me. It's an interesting thing where the image I have in mind is that it's a senior engineer that doesn't work at this company, that doesn't know the code base, but if it's a senior engineer, I can tell that engineer enough information so it goes off and does stuff, but certain things that are unspoken, I can trust it does the right thing. Like how to name variables and stuff like this. I don't have to spell this out, but I wouldn't expect the senior engineer that I pull off the street to know where our authentication system is used, or that this folder is like an old folder. You shouldn't touch this. This is it doesn't say anywhere that it's deprecated. It's just something that we all know.
Yeah.
So that's the mental model I have. And I think that's still super useful, even though it's not even close to this, like, it just knows your code base and it goes and does stuff magically, and you don't ever have to tell it anything.
Yeah. So we're kind of optimizing for a user set of people who want to use AI as like a power tool.
Yeah.
Right. And so along with that, we've kind of curated the early access user base of AMP to
We love our early access users. If you're listening and you're in that, thank you. We will keep the tokens flowing if you keep the feedback flowing.
it's almost like we're training like the process of building an application is like a training process in itself, and we've purposely curated our training
Yeah, that's
data,
right. Yeah.
like
Yeah,
our early
yeah,
access
yeah.
user feedback group
Yeah.
to be folks that give sort of the feedback that lead towards building a really good power tool rather
Yes.
than a read my mind kind of beginner
Yeah.
shallow tool.
Yeah.
um Okay, so I want to talk about some of the feedback that we received because it's been really interesting. We have people who are kind of like pushing the frontiers of what is possible, I think, with agents and LLMs. And there's almost like an emerging set of best practices or like a meta for how to invoke AMP. Say a bit about that. What are some of the kind of like patterns you've seen emerge?
I mean, we have thread sharing built in, so internally we see how a lot of people, use prompts, what they write in their prompts. So that's been useful to get like glimpses into this. And I think the first step that people take is they start by, this is not meta basically. This is pre, anything. It's just they start writing stuff and then they watch the agent go and figure stuff out, and then they realize I didn't get it. So then the next obvious step is like, everything I know about this problem, I'm going to put in this, and all of the files that I mentioned, I'm going to put in this. Or that's the first step. Then I would say the second step is people optimize for feedback loops. And we've talked about this before here, that it's, okay, I wanted to solve this problem. Let me make sure that the dev server is running, that the URL is accessible for the agent, so I can put it in and the agent fetches the stuff that it needs to fetch, and it has like a feedback loop, blah, blah, blah. And I would say the next stage is what I think you've been doing this a lot, and others, they have the agent write out plan files. Like, first write me a file with all of the to-dos that you have to do, and then they tell it to go and only do the first one. Then they maybe tell another agent, go and fix the next one. Tell another agent, fix the third one or something. And then I think there's like this other, early access users, there's this even layer above where people just automate all of this and spawn different agents and have like their own supervisor and whatnot. And it's just, that's the ultimate level. Yeah. But that's not meta that everybody uses. This is,
There's that one individual
Yeah, there's one,
who's really pushing the boundaries.
I mean, Jeff Huntley, he's been live streaming 4 or more agents operating like 24/7 when he goes to sleep or when he heads out, and he is on Twitter and there's like 500 people watching them.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. And we're really lucky to have people like that that are pushing the boundaries there.
I would say there's like one other thing, what Jeff is doing is interesting. He built his own supervisor to do, to restart the agents and to kick them into gear again and to resume them and make sure that nothing is ever idle, that the tokens keep flowing. And Indigo, who was just here, he also like has multiple agents running at the same time. And what both of them do, which I think is, we talked about this before, this big question, what both of them do is they organize their code base so it's even possible to do this. So we were just talking to Indigo and he's saying, well, some parts of the code base, I know that I will have to write this because it's like high signal code, and then it puts the lines in the sand where I can then have 4 other agents fill out the rest. So the feedback loop is that, I want them to go for a really long time. How can I do this? Well, I have to organize the code base in a certain way. And I think Jeff is doing this. And I think even, going back to the first few levels of Meta, I think a lot of the users are also doing this. First obvious step, the models are, that's not AMP, that's the models. I think the models are not that great at large files yet, even though they fit in the context window, but editing large files is an issue. So obvious step, split up large files. Like, why have a 4,000 line test file when you can have 2, 3, 4 files?
Going back to the users that we want to build for, this came up. We have a bunch of customers that, for whatever reasons, they have very large files, and they gave us this feedback that it just doesn't work well. Really, nothing works that well in these large files. And I think that they deep down want us to be building for the people that care more about agents working really well than letting them have 9,000 line files. And they don't have a good reason. Why can't you break it up into multiple files? And we really believe that agents are so valuable that they will be good motivation to break it up. But like, it is so refreshing, and frankly, it helps us move so much faster to just say, we are not going to try to solve that case. Or there's another person who had a good idea, totally plausible idea today, to make it so that if we don't find our agent.md file, that it will read the claw.md file. Now the problem is if we do that, then we have to read the .cursor rules, .windsurf rules, .client rules, whatever, and then which one, what order does it do, and then it's confusing, and that's the kind of stuff that means we're not making the core agent better.
Yeah.
So that's another example.
Yeah. I don't know when we talked about it. One of the first episodes about this, right? Like, will the code base bend to the agents, or will the agents bend to the code base? And by now, my money is on the code base will bend for the agents.
Yeah.
Like my argument is I've talked with, we're in San Francisco, I talked with a bunch of programmers, met people for coffee, and there's been 3 people in the last 3 or 4 days that had the same CV as I have. They, have like 10 years of Vim, hardcore Vim, only terminal, I love my editor. And now suddenly they use VS Code and AMP or other, agents and other editors because it's such a multiplier that they now realize I don't care really much that more about the editor. And is there a force stronger in the universe than the force that can separate the programmer from his favorite text editor?
So let me ask you a question. I would say all the Emacs people I know, they've already switched to like VS Code and agents. And do you think that's because, and Beyang and I use Emacs, do you think it's because Emacs people are smarter and they saw the future earlier? Or Emacs is not as good of an editor, so they switch sooner?
No. They do it because they see it as another reason to write eList, because then they go like, well, I could have the agent also program Emacs, and I could access Emacs. It's not. The other thing is a fall through.
Yeah. Steve Yagi, he might be working on AMP for Emacs. We'll see.
That's true. But one of our colleagues, Keegan, he's a hardcore Emacs guy, and for him, the big light bulb moment was, going back to there's no mode and nothing. For him, he built an MCP server that does eLisp or something, like it connects to Emacs. And turns out the models, they know eLisp well. So he had the agent connect to his Emacs instance and ask it, because everything in his life is apparently in Emacs, also emails. So he asked the agent, like, can you find the email that, I first sent to Thorsten or something? And the agent went and it looked through Emacs because it's all text, so it's super easy to consume. And then it found the email. Like, it used eLisp and it used text and it found the thing and returned it back. And for him, there was this, oh shit, like, it's, there's no magic. Like, it's truly just text. And that's also this, like, finally the Unix philosophy coming true. Like, you just have to send the contents of the buffer back and it gets it, you know? It was nice.
And for us, as we're thinking about adding support for more editors, I think in the old world, everyone would think, oh, let's go build a JetBrains plugin. Let's go build Visual Studio, Emacs, NeoVim, whatever, blah, blah, blah. The way that we're thinking about it is VS Code, let's make that really first class. Let's have a great web experience and have that work remotely so you can beat your kid's soccer game and kick stuff off. Let's have a really great CLI and see how far we can get there. And then any kind of hooks we have in other editors would be like, not in the JetBrains UI. It would just be having like AMP's Git Diagnostics tool call into the JetBrains API, but like just a shim, no UI there.
Yeah, I think there's like something, I also talked with somebody about this morning that, we've been saying before that the game is you have to stay nimble, you have to stay fast. That also means you have to keep your surface low. That also means you cannot like build elaborate integrations into large IDE surfaces because it kind of ties you this one thing. So
we know from experience,
it's
very difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And so the question this person had was like, but how do you balance this if the agent gets better the more access to information they have or the more feedback they get from the IDE and the tooling? How do you balance this with not getting too deep into this other, thing? And I don't know yet what the technical solution is, but I think there might be a way where you can, wrap other stuff and kind of intercept stuff without being super integrated. But that's it's a interesting question.
Yeah. All right. So a question came up from a customer today, which is, if they got 20,000 or 40,000 engineers or whatever, will all of them get full agents that can run tools, or will there be, from a cost point of view, some restrictions or security? Like, what does that look like?
What did you say?
You first.
What I said, right? Like, for me, it's a tool that a programmer yields. Like, it's a thing that makes them more productive. It gives them more leverage. So I would say, yeah, like give every programmer access to this tool. Like, why would you hold back? It's, I mean, cost, okay, but then it's still, I don't know, do some engineers get better computers than others? And, like, it's okay if they wait longer for it to compile, then I don't know.
I think it's like you look at the amount of time that this can save humans, and it
Yeah.
more than pays for itself for any role under the very large umbrella
Yeah.
of software engineer. And I feel like asking that question, it's almost like, do you ask if some subset of your developers can access a compiler or something like that? I
Yes.
feel like,
Yeah.
in the very near future, this will become kind of like a must-have, essential part of any programmer's tool belt.
Yeah. And before you answer, one interesting thing on like the cost, I'm surprised by how many people, even I would say haters online that don't like AI stuff, when people say I spend, the weekend I put like $50 into this and just let it rip or something, and then it did this, and even people that said, oh, this is the first time I'm using an agent, and I just put, I think somebody was like, I put $70 in tokens, and it fixed like this old code base, and instead of saying, wow, $70, like that's a lot, and where people would say, why would I pay for a text editor or something like this? Like $70 is a lot, but they would go, huh, compared to my salary, compared to a junior dev salary, that's not that crazy. Like to me, it's amazing how quickly people jump to this and say, actually, it's fine to pay for this because it is making me more productive. So what did you say to the customer?
Yeah, I think that there's the reality of rolling it out, and most companies are not able to roll out something that all of a sudden means 20% higher costs or 10% higher costs across their entire software engineering team. So there's probably some phased rollout. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to pay for a human, which is way more expensive than any of these things,
Yeah.
and that has way more risk, in some sense, then you're going to want to equip them with the best. But it's a interesting path between where we are today and there. And I think there are going to be a lot of engineering teams that say, if an agent costs 20% of a human developer's salary, it's probably on the high end, but let's say, if it gets into feedback loops, then they're going to have to change the structure of their engineering team. Like we've heard from a lot of companies that have kept engineering headcount flat for various economic reasons over the last few years, and now because they're looking ahead and they're seeing maybe we don't need more engineers. And actually, when you consider actually cutting a team versus not hiring in the future, it's the not hiring in the future that has a much bigger impact on total employment. Because let's say you cut 10% or 20% or something, obviously that's really tough, and that's like a fair number of people. But if you look at all the people that you're not hiring because you're on a lower trajectory, that's actually a lot more people that don't have jobs.
Yeah.
Back to the tech stuff.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about, because earlier we were talking about curating the feedback that we get and being very intentional about what feedback we respond to, and it's almost like we've realized that in order to build for this new world, we're not just building a product, we're also building a set of best practices for invoking that product and getting the most power out of AI. And part of that is like the feedback loop construction. So say more about that. And I think one thing in particular is, like when people use AMP for the first time, I think this holds for a lot of AI tools. There's a general perception that it does better on like front end code, specifically like front end React code. But we've seen people have success with like back end code as well. So like, how does the like feedback loop construction play into getting power and leverage out of this, and beyond just the kind of like simple React app scenario?
Yeah, I think it, and on the simplest level, it's, I said this before too, right? That if you ask a human to zero shot 500 lines, they can write you 500 lines, but they will not be correct. You need compiler feedback. You need some indication that what you're doing is correct. Like the squiggly lines, the diagnostics, you run the tests, you run the compiler, or you look at it in the browser or something. Turns out that's the same thing for agents. Like you need to give them feedback about what they're doing and whether it's correct or not. Like if you don't show them compiler errors, they might as well think you're using Svelte 4 instead of 5 because you just don't tell them and the code looks correct. So that's that's the whole idea behind this. And the first step is that, languages that have type systems can often produce more helpful errors because it kind of gives you constraints about what you can put where, and it kind of, makes the agent use the code more correctly. And then I think beyond that, it's about surfacing diagnostics, meaning from the language server, making sure that the agent knows how to build and test this and constantly reminding it of it, which we now do with the agent file, or you even tell it manually, which is what I often do. Like, if you work on this, constantly run this test, like just this test, ignore the others. And then it also knows whether what it's doing is right or wrong. And then my favorite bit is, and this is coming back to React, is when you work on front-end components and you tell it to open the browser and look at the browser, it's surprisingly good at this, and it's surprisingly good at JavaScript. So with like Playwright integration, it can query the DOM, it can navigate the page, and it modify the page. And my favorite experience was when who was it? I think we were on I was on a call with somebody else, and I built like a Space Invaders game, like as a demo. And then I said, can you make sure that this still works? And it opened the game in the browser, and the game would say, press space to start, and the agent would press space to start, and then would shoot something at the aliens to make sure it works. And
So you built a weapons system.
I mean, Ender's Game,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when people say AI doesn't work, then there's always things that you can do. Because again, there's no moat. These things are not complex. So if it doesn't work for your project, the first thing to ask is it actually doing the build? And 90% of the cases I see, because a lot of people will try something, it doesn't work, and then they can share the thread with us in AMP. 90% of the time, it's not actually running the build. And then, we can help them. We write the agent.md file or something like that. Then it does that. And then it's, can it run the build in a granular way? Can it run the test in a granular way? And you got to get it in those feedback loops. And if you do, it's not like it's going to be perfect, but it is going to be so much better.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I think it's still just such a puzzle for us. And it's why we're saying this over and over again, to try to explain how these things work and how moldable they are.
Yeah.
Because you should never stop at, it doesn't work for this.
Yeah. Talking about build tools, how some build tools, they spit out a lot of warnings, and the super verbose. Turns out that's not good for the agents. And it's also not good if I hire a new junior engineer and say, build this web app, and it shows up 8 warnings, then I have to go over and say, you can ignore those 8 warnings. They're harmless. But they wouldn't know. And the agent also has like this other thing with like, everything goes into context, everything is under the, and attention mechanism. So it kind of, you can trip it up by putting unrelated stuff in the context window. And so there's like this incentive that, they're just like us. The agents profit from having good build tools that have clean and actionable output.
Yeah, but as we know, sometimes some error that seems unrelated actually is related, and part of being a programmer with a lot of intuition and experience is knowing when that is the case.
Yeah.
So that's why, you can't be like, the model should have ignored that, because as humans, you can't always ignore that either.
But there's good moments where in our project we have like multiple subfolders that are pretty independent of each other, like the, different packages, extension CLI, for example. And then sometimes what it would do is it would run the build, and because I didn't pnpm install or something, so somebody added a dependency to some of the other projects that I wasn't working on, the model would go, there's an unrelated error because, but that's unrelated to our changes. So that's a nice detail.
Yeah. But just thinking, that's a really valuable feature, but I'm pretty sure that the models were trained on some examples where it had errors that were unrelated.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking of the, 50,000 examples that the models were trained on to be really good at this kind of tool calling, it's just kind of a shame that 700 of them had to be for this kind of thing because these people were so fucking stubborn where they're like, I wanted to know. And what are we being robbed of? Because that's what the models were having to do.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Like, what if they were only trained on code bases that were optimized for the agents? Like, how faster could they go? Yeah. Like, if everything was standardized,
Yeah.
But not the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I think over time you might start to see this feedback loop between the model behavior and the application layer in terms of like what workflows or what routes through the code base the application kind of like steers you toward. That at some level generates the training data that then gets fed back into the next round of like model training. And so it's almost like whatever the most compelling like AI coding agent, like whoever builds the most like powerful interesting AI coding agent, then that will kind of like steer how the next generation of models will evolve too, because that's where a lot of the training data will get generated.
Yeah. And models, for the most part, were trained, and what we're seeing is they're very high affinity for the tools that we think that they're trained with, like things like edit file, and those kinds of things. Even we're seeing like Gemini seem to be more reluctant to run shell commands. And I mean, that gets to what we were talking about at the beginning. If you have MCP jam in like 100 other tools, it hasn't seen any of those, and it's not nearly as good at invoking them. But that's where the next generation of models, they're probably going to kind of expand to more common kinds of tools to call.
Right? It's kind of an arms race, right? It's this, the models are not, coming back to what we said earlier, like if you have a model selector and just arbitrary tools, you won't get the same result as when you have tools that are optimized for one model with which it was trained. But then the big labs are incentivized to make their models work with a lot of different tool implementations and have them be as generic as possible. Right. So, there's like this back and forth, and I don't know, we'll have to see where we end up, but it's right now, I think the state is that you have to get a feel for what the model was trained for. And I think, Paul from Ader, like he's been blogging about this since I think a year at least, where I noticed that in this benchmark, this model likes this format of diff a lot more. And that's even pre-agentic, like he uses his own way of tool calling or did, and his own format for diffs, and the models work with different ways. And I think he had this anecdote that he posted somewhere where he was using one format of diff for one model because he thought the model would know this. But then the people who trained the model came back to him and said, actually, we also trained it on your other thing. And then he switched and had a performance improvement. So,
But we want to know, what did they train on?
Yeah, I want to see this thing.
We can, remember when we were talking and we can bleep that out. And they said, oh, no, you should be able just to take all the stuff you had for Claude and it should work just fine. And we don't want that. We want to know what are the tools that they trained on, because they're really smart there. We want to spend time building deeply into what they did. And when you look at Anthropic, I think one of the reasons why Claude 3.5 and 3.7 Sonnet are so good at a tool calling agent for coding is because I got to imagine they had some precursor to Claude Code for quite a while in advance. And so they had ironed out all the bugs and they knew what to train the model with. And I want the other labs to do that same thing. And then I want them to tell us all the tools they did, how the tools accept the arguments. Why do people not think that information is critical?
So much of like quote unquote prompt engineering could be obviated by just like conveying like, here's the general flavor of, or like here's a sample of what the training data looked like, and like the structures that were present in that. So like, okay, here are the general like tools, or here are the general patterns that will work really well.
Here's a training, a piece of training data where it nails it 100% of the time. Like that would be super valuable.
And I think one thing that you've also said, which really resonates, is like you do not want to go against the grain of the model. There's this notion of like the model wants to do what it wants to do, and I think what we saw already some of this in like people's reaction when like 3.7 Sonnet first came out. For some of the other like coding agents in the market, there was a general perception where like it was worse than 3.5. It's like 3.5, I think the general consensus is it was not as good at tool use and general reasoning, but it was much better at following instructions. So like the way that a lot of these tools worked is, like Cursor, you have like a bunch of rules that you kind of create, and so like a lot of those rules are followed to a T by 3.5 Sonnet, but then 3.7 Sonnet has a greater tendency to ignore them and just want to do more, like write more code or get further along in the kind of like agentic chain of operations.
Yeah, it's there's like this interesting thing where I don't know, I've never trained a large language model, right? But it's on one hand you have them trained to be this, chat bot that you ask questions and it gives you answers. But that's not really what you want from an agentic model. From an agentic model, you want to give it a task and it wants to go. But at the same time, they cannot destroy the one flavor of this and making this other better. So they have to balance this. And I think that's a hard thing to do. It's what we're seeing too with users, where they're like, sometimes I just want to ask it stuff, but then it went off and changed some files or something. But that's the same. What you're seeing is how it was trained. Like it was trained to be super aggressive or something. And yeah, it's a really interesting challenge.
Yeah. Oh, that gets me to another other kind of common feedback we get, which is people say, I just wanted to know if it would do something, but it went and did the thing. And you look at their prompt because they share it with us, and it's like, hey, I want you to, I want to do this thing and whatever, can you do it? Or how would you go about doing this? And then they're shocked that it went and did that thing.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, they argue like to, the end of their dear life that it was wrong. And so I did this thing where I went and I put exactly one of those prompts on Twitter, and I said, if someone came up to you and said exactly this, would you go and edit the files or would you just tell them? And like 70% of people said I'd go and edit the files. And it just gets to like that ambiguity of language.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of conventional product development wisdom that you have to.
The user's always right.
Yeah, exactly. So like that's a piece of conventional wisdom, right? It's like the user's always right. The user can do no wrong, and you have to go build something that works around the user's existing mental habits. But I think in the current age we're living through, things are moving so fast. What happens is like if you have one set of users that want to invoke it some way and they're kind of like set in their ways and they don't get value out of it, they're unhappy. But this other set of users will be like, oh, I'll just try something different. And then they'll unlock some capability and then they'll get like, an order of magnitude more productive. And then the first set, has this like, they're looking over at this like other set of users and they're like, oh, maybe I should copy what they're doing. And so like the user behavior kind of evolves to follow whoever is able to develop this coupling of like product and best practices. That
the product is emergent from user behavior, from people like Jeff Huntley and Indigo and like us and these awesome people we have.
Yeah, but I think another really big thing here is that it talks like a human, which is that makes this hard, right? Because then you fall into this trap of saying, could you please do this? And I always say please and thank you, right? But it's still like, if you just instruct it and say use this to do this, sometimes it's less typing and it will do it more correctly. Like it will use this tool that you instructed it to use, but it feels weird to do this because it feels like you're commanding this to do something. And I think there's like a big challenge here where the interface, and some people say maybe that's not the best interface, like RLHF models that, talk back to you and want to be nice to you. Maybe that's not the best interface to instruct an agent, but it's a interesting challenge. Yeah,
definitely. So I want to talk more about like, what's actually changed in the product. We've talked about a lot about like the persona that we're optimizing for and kind of like the best practices, but how has that guided the actual product evolution? So when you think about like the past couple of weeks, what have been like the biggest, interesting features that we've shipped?
I think one of the interesting or biggest things that changed the last few weeks is that our CLI, Oscar has been working on the CLI. That's been...
We got a CLI now?
Yes. And I mean, it went from what you built, which was like a basic REPL, I would say, to an actual interface that actually, looks good and displays stuff. And as of a couple hours ago, you can do file mentions and whatnot. I think that's the biggest piece. And then from my perspective, besides that one, it's a lot of like bug fixes, tuning, changing this tool again, like fixing this other thing, evaluating other models under the hood and seeing whether another model is better. Can we switch over? Yeah, that's from my perspective. I don't know what you...
Yeah, we've gotten a lot more people on. And so it's also been interesting how often we need to say no. or kind of subtly help the product get people to the right thing or explain that. So like our frequently ignored feedback, our manual and other things like that.
Yes. Today, I think it was the first user. Today we got, we're adding more people from the wait list, and we're gonna add more people today and all of that. But today was the first person that said, "Oh, you have Command Enter instead of Enter to submit the message. I love this." Every time I hit Enter, I'm like, "Thank God this saved me." I'm like, "Yes, finally." So yeah, it's more people constantly evolving. I don't think we have like a big, it's completely different yet, but it's also the reality of the situation is you have a team, you have people working on this, they all need to learn how to use it and to best work on this, and we're getting to a good place here where now there's a lot of people that get the idea behind this, and they get how to use it, and they get how to make it better, or also what not to do. Like we had a lot of no more features, like no feature, make the core loop better, do this, keep it simple. What you see is what you get, don't hide this, simplify this.
And so we want to avoid overfitting on today's model capabilities. And if we add a bunch of modes and here's how you define this, and granular natural language rules files, and blah blah blah, then if a great model comes out tomorrow, we're going to be in a tough situation because we have a lot of users who've invested a lot in all of these complex configurations and these workflows, and we would not have set the expectation that we're going to be opinionated and change, and like a lot of the stuff that they put in is not going to work in the new world. We don't want to be in that situation. We don't think our users want us to be in that situation. We think people want to get on AMP because they see that the models are moving so fast and they want to see where this is going.
Yeah.
So that's why we have literally a text area. So many other AI agents, they've got one of those rich text areas with like lexical or prose mirror or whatever. And we've done that enough to know that's like 1,000x increase in complexity.
Yes. Got to keep the surface small, got to keep it simple. And I got a new metaphor. I think I said this before, like, you want your product to be like this wooden scaffolding around the model so that it falls off when the model gets better, like it just jumps out of it.
I like that.
And but the new metaphor is maybe it's wrong, but it's like, say you have a broken leg and you have like a wooden casting around it or something, and what they do for animals or something, like it falls off after a time. Like that's what this should be, because we know that the new model will get better at certain things, and then you have to do less, and the product should be ready to handle a better model.
I think this also makes me think of one of the maybe like surprise hits in terms of features, which is the thread sharing, which is in some way it's like we're not trying to build a bunch of like tightly coupled like over optimized things around the model to get it to do the right thing. It's almost like, whatever model we integrate, we want people to be able to explore what that model can do and then have that knowledge disseminate to other parts of like your teammates, right? Like you just the best way to like get as far as you can with AI is just to see how like the people you respect the most in your team are using it. And for me at least, it's been like a huge learning experience, because I look at the way that like you both are using this, and I've learned a good deal about
What did you learn? Like what stands out for you?
I think like one of the realizations I had was when we had that pair programming session a couple weeks back, and seeing you use it for the first time and giving it more structured input to complete larger, more complex tasks. That was kind of an aha moment, because I feel like I had grokked some aspects of this, but I hadn't fully kind of like internalized or made explicit the meta strategy here. So I was doing it intuitively in some cases, but in other cases I was falling into this failure mode where, I'd ask it to do too much, and then it would try to do stuff, and the first few changes it made were incorrect, and so it would go off the rails. But having it first, write out its plan and then anchor what it's doing against that plan helps keep it much more sort of like on the rails, and makes its output a lot more auditable. So like that was something cool that I learned from just like watching you do it. And like now I just like hop into like the team thread view every now and then and see how my like favorite fellow AMP users are using it, and what sort of like use cases they've had recently.
I think there's also this you do this a lot when people say, oh, it didn't work for this, then the answer is that's the model. Like there's nothing we can do.
It feels super dismissive.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
time I say that, it feels like I'm literally saying, fuck you, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, do you have any brain cells? It's the model. We're not going to fix it because we hate you and your whole family.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. But it's example that everybody knows is Claude 3.7 really loves to leave comments when it removes stuff. And we try to prompt this out of it. Like so and somebody was saying, I have a rule file especially for this. Do not leave the comments. Like do not do this. Do not ever do this. And it doesn't work. Like
Well, they would show one example of it working, and then we say, okay, let me
Yeah.
try, and then it would add comments.
Yeah,
And it'd be
yeah.
like, oh, add this, and then it's like,
Yeah.
it's
And it's the grain of the model. Like they somehow trained it to leave comments when it removes an import statement, no longer needed. And I'm like, dude, you put it there. Like don't tell me.
But it's possible that in the transcript of the chat might actually be an important kind of like thought marker for it.
Yeah.
So you don't even know if you were to get rid of that, what else would you lose? I'm
Yeah.
not saying, oh, we can never get rid of it. Scientists don't know how.
Yeah.
But it's this whack-a-mole thinking that we see so often.
Yeah.
Well, so earlier we talked about, model choice, and we sort of made the explicit decision to not let the user decide in this case for exactly the reasons that we just talked about, because we want to build something that unlocks the capabilities of a specific model. That being said, we are trying out like other models as well. So like you mentioned Gemini Pro. Can you talk a little bit about, how that's looking? Do we think we'll have Gemini up for all or part of the use cases we want to support, and how might like the scaffolding, that wooden scaffolding that we just described, like change for Gemini versus Claude?
I think that when a new model comes out, a lot of the other companies is like, oh, in our benchmark it did this, and
The evals,
and evals are good. Like I want to have evals, but I think this is untuned evals, because what we just said, like Claude has a certain way of using certain tools and Gemini has a certain way of using other tools, and in order to get the most out of each model, you have to do an honest effort to tune your prompt and the tools for that specific model, which will be, ideally they give us like an instruction manual, like this is the way you should implement your tools, or this, which is, Anthropic is doing this, so shout out to them. But it's, right now we're exploring Gemini and it's looking good. Like it's far more, it feels smarter in some sense, but it also feels less like a workhorse than Claude 3.7 because it's contemplating. It's like, here's what I would do. And I'm like, how about you do it? How about you do it? And Claude 3.7 just goes and fixes it for you. But
And there's some weird things, like Gemini will spit out in the markdown kind of content, text content block, the whole code file it is going to write out, and then it'll go do an edit. And that's like kind of annoying.
Like Claude just makes the edit.
Yeah.
Gemini is like, here's the entire file with my edit. Now let me go and like apply it. And then reading through it, you're like, well, why don't you just?
It's noisy, and then you waste more tokens, and it makes me think that like, was the AI coding agent tool use case kind of bolted on?
Yeah.
But I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I've had some pretty awesome experiences with it too.
Yeah. Full transparency, like we said, no model selector, right? But then you can see the strength of each model, and you kind of want to switch sometimes and have this model do this, and you want to have this model do this. I don't think the model selector is the answer to this, because it's often things that you want in the same task. Like ideally you switch the model, or the models can talk to each other. Like if Claude 3.7 could talk to Gemini and say, what do you think I should do? And then Gemini does it, and then Claude 3.7 goes and implements it. That would be ideal. And also, Aider, again, like they had the concept of architecture and implementer, and but it's interesting to feel the characteristics from both model. And
yeah, I get what you're saying, where I've seen that they have different strengths, and it's like, oh shit, it would be nice to have a model selector if every single user knew exactly when to choose the right one, and we could take them away at any moment. And so I think it's best to think about our commitment to, we are not committing to having a model selector. We are not committing to, not having any kind of model selection or multi-model usage.
I think the way it'll look is if there is this notion of like choosing a model, it's really you'll kind of like select a sub agent of sorts that will have a different model as part of its like core reasoning loop or
Mm.
implementation. But from like the user's point of view, it's like you'll be selecting an agent rather than a model. Like taking an agent implementation and swapping out the internal model it's using. It's almost like, I'm taking a robot and like changing the OS and changing the brain and expecting it to
Mm.
work as well. It's like
Yeah.
if you stick
Yeah.
like a fly brain into like a dog robot, it's not
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
work well. But like,
Or a
maybe
Ford engine into a BMW.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But like maybe we will have this notion of like, you use the Ford for some tasks and you use the
Yeah.
BMW for other tasks or something like that.
Both are great.
Yes. um, okay, so we've talked a lot about kind of like, past state, current state, not wanting to over optimize for, this generation of models. What about the next generation? Like we want to be skating to where the puck is going. So where do we think the puck is going with respect to coding agents?
You want to go first, or?
Yeah, I think that this remote execution idea that I can, for my kids' soccer game, go and kick off threads and the agent can go do that. And then there's two ways I think that I want to do it. In some cases, it's going to be these simple tasks that it's going to have a really high accuracy rate on. And I have good intuition about what it'll do like nearly 100% on. And I'll just want to merge them from there. And then in some cases, I think of the person who's playing those like 10 chess games all at once and they're going, blah, 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 where you kind of want to pop in. And that's really hard to do in your local state if you have like git checkout, even git work tree, and you have like 9 different VS codes open. That's a pain. So there's got to be some other workflow stuff around that, and there's got to be some remote execution, I think. I think that's a really interesting step, and that's not like having the agents necessarily communicate with each other. That's just parallelizing the single agent thing.
Yeah, I think that's, we talked about this, and it sounds like a joke where it's like, oh, I'm at my kid's soccer game and I want to kick off an agent. But the reality is that everybody who started using agentic editing bumps into this problem of, well, do I watch this now? Like, do I watch it do this stuff? And then everybody, like, I have an attention problem now. Like, it's just the agent is going stuff and it's command tab and I'm gone. And then the Bing sound comes on and go back and it's like, oh, did you do the right thing? So you immediately go into this, I want to start them and then have it do stuff and then later on revisit it. And everybody so far on our team who started using agentic editing came to this, where they like, I want to start it off while I'm using my phone and sitting and having lunch, and then I want to come back.
My favorite is no names. Someone was going on a weekend trip with their wife, and they had a list of a bunch of independent things they wanted to kick the agent off to do, so that when they got back from the trip, they wouldn't have wasted that time, and they'd have all the diffs ready for them.
Yeah. I'm gonna put money into this, kick it off, and then I go on a trip. Yeah. So I think that's big. The other thing that's really big is, where we should definitely work on, and is just multi-agent workflows where sure you can launch multiple instances, you can do the thing that Jeff is doing and build your own orchestrator, but ideally this is what we do. And I think 2 steps further along, it's okay, do we need to escape from the editor? Do we need to go in some other thing? Because right now the editor is mostly a diff viewing utility, right? I mean, I don't know how far ahead it is, but I think that's definitely something that comes up again and again. Like, how do you see the value of the text editor? When do you do multi-agent? How can I watch the agents do this stuff? And
Yeah. What you said about like focus and attention, that's an interesting point. I wonder if there's like an analogy to like the self-driving car, which, it's a maybe overused analogy at this point, but like, how like people said about like self-driving, it's like, this middle ground of, if like the human's just controlling the steering wheel completely and doing everything, it's fine. Like you'll get to your point safely, assuming you have like a safe human driver. And if it's like fully automated, that's also fine. Like you don't have to worry about it. But like this in-between area is where you have to think about the experience a lot, because what you don't want is to communicate, like over communicate the level of automation. And then you're in your like supposedly self-driving car, you kind of like take your hand off the steering wheel and your focus off the road, and then all of a sudden there's like an edge case that comes up because you're no longer like maintaining that focus. And I feel like I have had to adjust my expectations for like flow state a bit, and
Yeah.
it's not like all
Yeah.
bad. It's almost that I feel like I've reached like almost like a different kind of flow state where it's like you figure out I don't know. For me, it's like different modalities. Like sometimes I'm doing, several kind of like lightweight tasks, and then it's like, all right, I'll kind of
Yeah.
like round robin between these two. But then sometimes it's like I'm working on something like more focused or nuanced, and so like I'll have one main thread, and then my kind of like auxiliary thread is just like reading more about what it did or understanding
Yeah.
like adjacent parts of the code base or something like that.
Yeah. But it's an actual issue. It's an
Yes.
actual issue that
Yes.
everybody reported. You get distracted
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
somebody, not related to us in any way, but somebody tweeted yesterday that they have like a big phone addiction problem now because it's like they send off stuff and then they scroll, and it's crazy. And then so what we're working on is eyeball tracking. If we see your eyeballs going somewhere else, red light comes on, electric shocks. You got to keep your hands on the keyboard.
An ad-supported model.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say like like along the line of ad supported. It's like, oh, we're actually gonna bring Twitter into your editor
Yeah, there you
because
go.
like then you don't have to
Yeah,
kind of switch.
we'll
Yeah.
get-
But
the-
even in the near term, code migrations are now possible that were never possible before.
Yeah.
Code review is a much bigger problem. If there's 10 times as much code being written, you think humans are going to do a good job of reviewing all that? They never were doing a good job in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even I think that there's a role for letting you specify deterministic hooks so that, like, common thing, if you're using Svelte 5 and the model was trained on Svelte 4, if it ever tries to do an edit file tool call that contains this literal string in the simplest case, you want to essentially like auto interrupt the model and say, hey, dummy, we're using Svelte 5. And little things like that can help close the gap in a pretty, I think, predictable and like, consistent way.
Yeah.
And that
Want
is
that.
That's accepting the flaws of the model, right? Which is realistic
Yeah.
and honest. It's not expecting, it should get it right. It's no, we know that it will leave comments when it removes something.
And it also
so-
falls away because you can
Yeah.
imagine the next model will not try to do Svelte 4.
and it won't trigger it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's almost like very lightweight guardrails that don't interfere with the core reasoning ability of the model.
Yeah.
Like what you don't want to do is like shove a bunch of guidelines into the context window, because then what you end up doing is confusing it, and then it does a worse job on what it's really good at, which is like the core kind of like loop,
Yeah,
like go
yeah.
and do stuff and
Yeah. It's more. Yeah. It's like more. The feedback loops when it happens versus rules up front. It's you just did the wrong thing. Correct this, please, and it probably will do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we're about out of time, but like last thing I want to ask is the delta between where we are now and like where the puck is going. What are kind of like the next couple things that you think we should improve or build? And like no commitments here, but like just based on current experience and feedback that we are not ignoring.
Yeah, I think obviously make everything more rock solid, stable. The UI, you want it to feel nothing can ever go wrong. Like you want it to feel rock solid, where the only uncertain thing is the model. Like you want the rest to feel stable.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Then I think exploring what's on my list is, for example, can we add Cloud Code recently added this support for this like taskless management, like turning the meta into something that's now supported by the product, and again in a lightweight way. Everything else server side is interesting and being worked on. That's like immediate, switching the model, tuning the other model. More agent to agent stuff. Like I did something a couple weeks back, but it didn't really work out. So now I'm thinking, can we do something else where two agents talk to each other? Can we have a supervising agent? And I think that takes a lot of work. But yeah.
Yeah, we'll get there though. I think that's where I'm thinking towards too.
Yeah.
It's like longer chains of automation, more robustness and reliability.
Yeah. I've been working a lot on ampco.com, the server side of it, but also that has a front end and a back end. It's database stuff. It touches on authentication. So it is, I think, a pretty good test case for like, real complex app. That's what's got me thinking about the deterministic hooks. And, one example is I would feel really good knowing that the agent wouldn't actually edit any files, related to auth unless like it got my permission to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Or, afterwards it flagged it. So, just making the site better and then making it so that the agent gets better at making the site better. And with the whole AMP team, the way that we work is we're constantly using the thing. Every single person who is working on AMP is also working with our users, and we have 0 issue tracker. We have 0 plans. It is literally, if you're on the AMP team, we trust you to work on the thing that you think is most important.
Yeah.
And we curate the right people so that it's not a bunch of people working on like random dumb shit.
Yeah. And I think that also speaks to our belief that, if we execute properly here, stuff is going to flow outward from the editor as well. And a lot of the your traditional issue tracker or code review tool, that might be an antiquated thing now with how coding agents work. So
yeah,
I don't know.
lots to do.
Yeah, lots to do.
All right. Happy hacking.